Uh, we have really in the Syriac sources of the 8th and 9th century, the earliest one, you find continuity. You cannot be sure if this saint did build this church in 625, in 635, in 645. You don't feel any difference between before the conquest or after the conquest. And this is the case until 700, approximately. So, so it's difficult to know what was in the Muslim time and was it an Islamic time at the 7th century. It was just the post-Byzantine and Sasanian time, if you look at the hagiographical sources. So you have many cases of this kind of continuity difficult to figure out. You have obviously Rabban Hormiz, that the governor of Mosul, they helped the heretics, in this case, they are the Mayaphysites, to build to repair their monastery and to build the church with money collected by the Mayaphysites. But you have also in Ishoyab III a letter from this period in 640, and he's mentioning the building of a church, and it's probably in early Islam, if we can speak of early Islam in this case. And you have a lot of cases in Ishodna of Basra's book. Ishodna of Basra was living in the 9th century, but I will try to show you many examples. But here you have a new monastery built in the 7th century, and you have a lot of attestation in Bar Ebraeus of 3 churches built in Takrit in this continuum between 630 and 690, 700. So you had the case of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, who was the governor of Iraq before Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf came and helped John of Dylan, that we spoke a lot about. And just before, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad was healed by this Mar Abda ibn Hanif, that was living obviously in the Kufa region. And the text said that he came to his grave and began to thank God, and who had granted him his leg because he repaired his leg, God through the monk, through the saint's prayer. And he made to the monk a large bir, and bir is this in the dictionary. So I let you understand what he means, but some kind of almond, and he's helping to the martyrion construction and visitation. That's obvious. And you have the very interesting 676 synod that we already speak about. Françoise talked about the 676 council, I think, maybe someone else, I don't remember. And obviously in this canon 2, the canon first is against the heretics, the canon 2 is against people who are, as you said, Pierre-Louis, who are building churches without the consent of the bishop. And this council was in Arabia. The council was in Bet Qatraye, in the actual island of Bahrain. So 50 years after the Islamization of the region. And there is no mention of any lame civilian authority, political power or something, just problems between secular elites and clerical, lowman clerical and the upper clergy. And you have also the case of the Church of Fostat I wanted to speak about, but to let it to Audrey, but as Audrey cannot speak, maybe I will try to explain it. You have the case that already Elif presented, and its whole case study very interesting because you have this common source and Dionysius Syriac source and Agathus of Manbij Arabic source and Theophanes Greek source. I think in this case it's a common Greek source from the late 7th century that Maria Contano points out. And so I cannot explain you why, because it's very complicated. So in the Syriac version, they are explaining that Muawiyah, like he built the church because he had a revelation like Heraclius, you know, and like Heraclius, he wanted he was going to defeat Ali, and he had the revelation that he will win. That is the Syriac explanation, but it's a late, I think, Syriac explanation. In the Greek text, it's just normal. They are just collecting pounds to rebuild, and Muawiyah is just passing in the region, but there is no specific problem. And just a reminder of the 11 columns, it just came in my mind today because Qubbat al-Silsila was built in the time of Muawiyah. So I think Muawiyah had some kind of Christian, he was not a Christian, obviously, but he maybe had some kind of, how do you say, synthesis ideology. He wanted to make something special. I don't know, but you have these 11 columns. And so I keep on the Ambo Bema problem. And the church, that's today in Takrit, they call it Ahudemma's church. I don't think it's Ahudemma's church. I think Ahudemma's church is just here. But here is the mosque, exactly as Mattia described, they cut the basilical complex because there were a lot of churches, at least 3 on the citadel and maybe 1 down, all built in the 7th and 8th century. And so you have here a church that is for sure between 650 and 750. So you can have these elements because of the textual sources, because they don't know anything in Takrit before. And we can suppose it's the same shape of then has the foundation of the Church of Ahudemma in the 700s, something like that. The references are all in Bar Ebrahus. Bar Ebrahus is not exempted of mistakes. He makes a lot of mistakes, a lot, but in this case, I think it's credible. In the opposite side, you have Kanisat al-Abid. In Kanisat al-Abid, you have this very interesting plaque that is referring to the Church of the Hacien, and the Hacisians were not very known, and now we know for sure where is their monastery. It's the same shape of monastery you all show, so I will not highlight on this issue, just to mention that the style, the architecture look like a lot with Takrit, and it's the same theme, it's the same moment. So we have no proof of the early building of this monastery and this church, but then you have like dozens of mentions in the Ishu Adna's book and in Thomas of Margam book of foundation. I just selected 2 examples in Ishu Adna's book for the early 8th century. So we have, when we have dates for this foundation, so he died 19 years, he died old in 746, so you can imagine when he founded the monastery. Joseph also, he came to the desert, etc. In all cases, we have dates. We have, obviously, in the cities, we have the church of the new church of the Mayaphysites. Before there were no church in Haran, it seems. So it's the first cathedral in the time when Haran became the capital of all the north, of all the Umayyad north. So they have to have cathedral. And Simon of Khatmin, Simon of the Olives, that Elif and Philip would already talk about, he became the first bishop of Haran for the Mayaphysites. And from this point, he controls all the church, is controlled by Khatmin in the Jazira and a lot of places. And in Nisibis, the same, and I will not emphasize on the issue of the Bet Sluto, but in the life of Gabriel, not the life in Simon, it is said that he founded a Bet Sluto, so an annex of the church, and this annex for the church became the mosque. It was for the Tayoye. It was the mosque for the Tayoye. And I think it's the life of Gabriel, I think it's for the end of the 8th century, and they were just proving that even the mosque of the Muslims in Nisib was Christian founded and was a part of the Christian church. So you have also a case of the early foundation of the first cathedral of the Mayaphysites in Antioch. Same problem. They were not present in Antioch. Antioch is more for Chalcedonian. So they built their church in the time of Yazid, and we know it from Michael the Great. And Michael the Great also highlights on the foundation of some kind of martyrion, because on this martyrion you can read an inscription, and on this inscription he knows that there is a martyr called Mu'ad. That is why you can understand why I'm interested for church foundation, because Mu'ad was a Christian Arab, as Michael said. I'm not sure it's true, but he wrote it in the monastery in the region of Dara, because the bishop, a status of Dara, asked for his body, took it away, and built a monastery on it. And we are in the time of Muhammad ibn Marwan in the 700s, the foundation of Harran and Nizib. Harran and Nizib were the two capitals of this regime. So again, Elif's very already presented all these churches. The Church of Ambar, I think you did not present it, but it's very in the same region, just in the plain, not on to the Abdin, but in the plain between Dara, 2 kilometers from Dara. So it could be this kind of, I don't know, maybe, why not? Because both churches, if I understand right, they are maybe from the 7th or 8th century, could be or not? Okay, I don't know. But there is another case when we have stratigraphy, because in all this conference, we are always, though we have stratigraphy, and no one speaks about this case. So we have two very important articles about the Tunaynir church. It's on the upper Khabur. Tunaynir was the castrum in the border of the Romanian Empire. So we are in the West Syrian environment. And the church was at the beginning like a house. And at the middle of the 7th century, late 7th century, the dark part was built, see? And then in the 8th century, they reshaped it with a narthex and some elements and the apse. So they reshaped it, and it looked like a lot, I think, this kind of churches. But I don't know. In Tunaynir? Not in what I read. Not in what I read, it's all 7th century. In any case, I don't know. Okay, it's interesting discussion. I don't know. In fact, in Tunaynir, it's outside the city. It's in a monastery, and the city was growing up during the 7th and the 8th century. That's what archaeological survey shows. And when the city touched the place, they were increasing the size of the monastery. And this is the so-called Church of Anja. So you can see the apse, and it's the plan. So you see that I have the proof that from the from the entry of Anja. Yes, the Church of Bakhra. Bakhra was obviously from the Tetrarchy castrum, so could be a church from the Tetrarchy. I don't know. There is this issue that indeed Elif was referring to of the case of Anja and the case of the teams who went and all went from northeastern Mesopotamia. Only one is from Edessa, and he wrote he writes in Greek and in Syriac. And it is interesting because it pronounces Gabriel and not Gabriel. So we know that the Aleph is pronounced Olaf. And at this time, and we have a lot of details of these teams, and they are organized by, the priests, diacons, laymen. It's very interesting, and it could be a way to explain why in the Umayyad period you have so many Sasanian forms and shapes and ornamental. In Amman, it's the plan, and also all the decoration is Sasanian. It's Sasanian inspired. It's post-Sasanian. It is the architecture developed at this moment. So, and I already mentioned this case, but I think it's interesting. You have mentions of fly and stone building, and in the 8th century, in Thomas of Marga's book from the 9th century also. And you have in one case, he explains that it was built by Ish'oyab III in the 650s, and then rebuilt in the 8th century, and from mud brick to stone. And in one case, he precised that it's stone and limes. I think it's important for them to go from the mud brick to the stone, but it's just a guess. We can discuss